Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. We have a fascinating discussion today about green and black tea. Literally millions and millions of people suffer from hypertension that raises blood pressure. What if just drinking tea every day could actually be something beneficial for them? We're going to get into the science in just a little bit and see what we can discover. Before we get started, of course, we have to thank our title sponsor, Legendary Foods, makers of the amazing tasty pastry. This is basically an upgraded Pop-Tart that tastes better, has 20 grams of high-quality, high-leucine protein, and less than 1 gram of sugar. If you go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary, you use the code SHR10, you can get them all for yourself, plus other flavors. Now, we give away a couple boxes a day now on the show, and all you have to do is listen for the secret word during the commercial break and email it to onair@superhumanradio.net. Include your mailing address. So if you win, we don't have to come back to you and say, send us your address, and we can just get them out to you quickly. And we're giving away several boxes a day right now, so your odds are good. So let me bring my guest on, and we'll get into the discussion at hand. Welcome to the show, Dr. Geoffrey Abbott. How are you?
Thanks so much, Carl. I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
Good. You prefer I call you Professor or Dr. Abbott?
Jeff.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. Unpretentious. Very good. So what research preceded the study we're going to talk about today that kind of made this a necessary next step?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's kind of a serendipitous series of discoveries we made in the lab, and you can stop me if I go on too long. We study a class of proteins in the lab called potassium channels. Potassium channels, as you know, each cell in your body is encased in a lipid kind of shell called a bilayer, lipid bilayer. And obviously, it's important for water-soluble molecules to get across that bilayer in a controlled fashion. So potassium channels that we study in my lab, they allow potassium ions to go across the membrane. They're water-soluble. They have to be controlled really carefully because they underlie all the electrical processes in your body, such as heartbeat, thinking, muscular movement, etc. Potassium ions leave the cell to return the cell to rest, right? So we study these channels. They're really important in cardiac arrhythmias. They're really important in epilepsy, in muscular disorders, even in other things such as diabetes, gastric function, you name it. They're in pretty much every cell. So we found that these potassium channels form physical complexes with another type of protein called the solid transporter, and they carry things like sugars and other water-soluble molecules across cell membranes as well. And by forming a physical complex, they control each other's activity. We were looking for different drugs or small molecules that would modulate either one of these proteins to affect the other protein in the complex. And a postdoc in my lab called Ria Manville decided to look at some plants and found that a molecule called rotlerin or malotoxin activates the very important KCNQ2/3 potassium channels in the brain. That led us on a road of discovery where we've been looking at botanical medicines for the last 2.5 years. We found that there's many folk medicines used for disorders such as epilepsy or hypertension that have molecules in them that activate the potassium channels in the KCNQ family. These potassium channels are important all over the body. They're in the brain, they're in smooth muscle, they're in the heart, they're in epithelia. They control so many processes, and we kept finding that molecules in traditional folk medicines would activate these potassium channels beneficially in a way that corresponded to the diseases that the folk medicine experts were actually using them for. So, for instance, cilantro or culantro, which is also known as fitweed, has been used historically to treat seizures. We found that cilantro activates the potassium channel in the brain that's very important in controlling excitability in the brain, and that a molecule in cilantro called E2-dodecanol activates this channel at nanomolar concentrations. So it provides a molecular basis for that, right? So then we started looking at KCNQ5. Now that channel is in the brain, but it's also in the smooth muscle surrounding the blood vessels. And it's long been known that if you can activate KCNQ5 channels, you can actually relax the smooth muscle around the blood vessels and potentially lower blood pressure. So we looked at a range of herbs, such as chamomile, fennel seed, lavender, all things that have been historically used to lower blood pressure. And there's also been some type of either preclinical or clinical testing under a controlled fashion to show that they can lower blood pressure. And we found all 10 blood pressure lowering herbs that we studied all activate the KCNQ5 potassium channel. So incredible correlation. We studied 5 control herbs that do not have not been used historically to lower blood pressure, and not a single one of those activate that channel. So you're talking about a 1 in a million chance, something like that, of that being coincident. Right. So then we started looking at tea because it was a natural, progression from that work. And we thought, well, tea has been shown in population studies to lower blood pressure. It's not going to lower it by 20 or 30 points, but a few points. And we found that actually when we just matched up, extracted some green tea bags and also some black tea bags and looked at, we use a methanol extraction to get everything out of there. And then we evaporate it down, get rid of the methanol, apply it to these channels expressed in a cell line. So you've got kind of a minimalist system. And sure enough, these green tea or black tea extracts just activate this channel really, really effectively. So that's where we came from. We came from, looking for small molecules that would teach us something about the way these proteins work, to then getting more interested in, wow, a lot of these botanical medicines actually they work, and there's a really methodical a molecular basis for how they operate. It seems like the channels that we are really interested in are an important target for molecules in these medicines. And then we moved on to tea because 2 billion people drink tea every day across the planet. It's an incredible, incredibly. It's second only to water in terms of what people drink in the planet, right? So if you have molecules in tea that are beneficial or otherwise, they're reaching a huge chunk of the population.
So we know that there's other channels that are responsible for vasoconstriction and smooth muscle contraction, calcium channels, sodium channels, magnesium channels. Is there any evidence that these potassium channel modulators, if you will, work better in the face of some of these other minerals being in a sort of homeostatic? I guess is it dependent? The effects of this on on potassium channels, is it dependent on some of these other players being nice?
So that's a really good question. You've touched at the balance between the excitatory forces in a cell, which would be the sodium channels and the calcium channels, versus the sort of relaxing forces in a cell, which would be potassium
and magnesium.
So what happens is for smooth muscle or any muscle contraction, typically you'll get a sodium channel opening at the start of the action potential. That allows sodium in, and all these channels work by diffusion, right? So electrochemical gradient. So sodium's high outside the cell, low inside. Sodium comes in. Now that depolarizes the cell, so it makes it cells at rest are very negative, have a very negative membrane potential, maybe minus 80 millivolts. Sodium comes in. That makes the cell a bit more positive. That opens up the calcium channels because they're voltage dependent, they're voltage gated. So now the calcium channels open, as you alluded to. Calcium comes in. Now that calcium sets off a signaling cascade that's actually responsible for muscular contraction. So the calcium is the molecule that actually creates the muscular contraction. It binds to the right proteins, and so, but you also activate these voltage dependent potassium channels as well, and they can start off the end of the action potential by allowing potassium out, and you start to get relaxation. Now, what the KCNQ channels do is they can be contributing to setting the membrane potential of the cell. So if you can open those at a membrane potential where they wouldn't normally be open, you can prevent the excitatory event from even happening. So that's what the idea behind these molecules in tea would be. They send the cell so negative that now calcium's never going to come in because those calcium channels don't open.
So you looked at black and green tea because these are probably the most popular, but all tea, as you pointed out during our pre-conversation, come from the same plant. So is there something unique about those two categories of tea that we don't see, or do we see this across any tea that you choose to drink?
So the two teas, we studied green and black tea. They're both from Camellia sinensis, and they're really just different levels of fermentation. So as we discussed, green is kind of the pure or the less fermented processed form, and then as you get further along, you get black tea. Oolong's in the middle. So they're all the same species. They just have different levels of the specific active molecules in the tea polyphenols, and the ones we looked at in particular are catechins. So any of those teas do it. We found that green tea, which is known to have higher levels of those polyphenols, was more effective in activating our channels, which was not a surprise based on the fact that it has a high concentration of those molecules. Now, if you're talking about other types of tea from different plant species, they might have completely different molecules in. For instance, we've studied chamomile tea before. Right now, a lot of people like chamomile, as we discussed later on in the evening, doesn't have caffeine in it. It's really relaxing. We actually found that chamomile tea is really effective at activating that potassium channel as well, the same one. And it makes sense because chamomile tea has been used to relax and also to lower blood pressure. Chamomile has a fascinating putative history in terms of medicinal plant use. When we talk about medicinal plants, there's evidence that human species that predate Homo sapiens actually use medicinal plants effectively, going back to really early hominids. So there's been in historical archaeological digs in Israel have shown that there's things like chamomile tea and fennel seed were used maybe 800,000 years ago. So way before Homo sapiens or even Neanderthal man. And it's thought because these plants are quite bitter that they may have been used actually for medicinal purposes. And we have fairly good evidence that Neanderthals use medicinal plants as well, and I can get into that as well if you want. So our study focused on this one type of tea, green, black, oolong, whatever from Camellia sinensis, but there are other herbal teas that have bioactive molecules as well, as you know.
What about white tea? So we have a viewer on YouTube, PK Grad Greek. What about white tea? Is that just another fermentation process?
I believe white tea is the same. Yeah, as I was saying, green, black, and oolong, I was thinking someone's going to ask about white tea, and I think it's just another one in the succession. I believe it's a little bit lower concentrations, but I have to look that up, so I don't want to say for sure. We haven't studied that. It's sort of less commonly used. We didn't study that, But it's a really good question. Yeah.
So
you would. Yeah. Sorry.
No. Go.
Well, if you looked, we found that 2 T polyphenols were active in this channel, activating this channel, epicatechin gallate and epigallocatechin 3 gallate, right? So you would have to look and see studies to see what concentrations they were at in white tea and compare them to green and black. We just haven't done that.
So does the fermentation process contribute anything to this discussion? And here's why I say that. We know that if you eat raw cannabis, it won't get you high because it requires a decarboxylation process in order for the THC to become psychoactive. Should we just be going, the heck with tea, let's eat the plant and put it in your salads?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. We do know that some plants require some kind of processing. We found that the green tea, which is less fermented form, is more effective. So, whether one could stomach eating green tea leaves, I don't think you could. So it's better to just, take the probably the rawest form of tea that's readily available, which is the green tea, dried leaves. We haven't studied whether fresh green tea leaves would have higher levels, so I don't know. Typically, what we do in the lab when we're collecting plants is we'll freeze them as soon as we get them back to the lab, we'll freeze them, or even before that, we have a mobile freezer. So we try and keep them in the freshest form possible, and then we'll extract them straight away. But we've tried many different herbs that are available online as powder form. They're super active as well. Many if you look historically at botanical medicines, many of them are steeped first, boiled even to extract. So I think if you don't do the extraction process like that, your body is not maybe capable of extracting everything from the leaves. You need some kind of crushing and maceration process, and then boiling and extraction. We've tried taking off the methanol when we do a methanol extraction, either by simple evaporation or by using a rotovat, which basically boils. We don't see any difference. So I think a lot of these compounds, they stick around. What we found with the tea was actually pretty interesting. We found that if you heated it just mildly to at least 35 Celsius, there was a different product produced from the catechins that was more effective at opening the channels. But of course, once the tea is in your body, whether you heated it, whether you had cold tea or not, once it's in your body, it's going to be 37 Celsius. So just by drinking it, you release that more active form of the catechin. That was fascinating, and that was a serendipitous discovery, which was surprising. And we did the mass spectrometry to show it wasn't just an artifact. We showed that there's there's a breakdown of one of the catechins that seems to be more active in opening the potassium channel.
That's fascinating. Now, is matcha tea come from the same plant as the rest of these, and green tea as we talk about? Or
yeah, I believe it's from green tea. But what we found was we tried matcha powder and compared it to green tea leaves, and the matcha powder wasn't very effective. So the green tea leaf was affected. Now was highly effective, and we got that from tea bags. So I don't know whether there's something else in matcha tea in the processing that either loses the active compounds or adds something else that blocks our channel, because many compounds block these channels as well. And it sort of sounds like it wouldn't happen, but we see this with plants where there'll be multiple active compounds in a single plant, some of which block, some of which open, some of which synergize together. So we studied a traditional African anticonvulsant, the Mellitus plant, Mellitus oppositefolius, which has been used for hundreds of years to treat seizures in countries like in Africa and Madagascar. We found that there's 2 molecules in that plant that sit together in a binding site in the potassium channel right next to each other and synergistically activate those channels. So if you try either molecule alone, it's somewhat effective. If you add them together, they synergize. It's incredible. And the indigenous people of Africa who used that plant didn't understand the molecular basis, obviously, but they knew it worked and they used it. And we showed at the molecular level exactly where those 2 compounds bind. It's incredible. But there's also a compound in that plant that blocks the channel, but luckily it's not as potent. So at the lower level it's in, it doesn't have a negative effect. But this, these are complex products, right? This is always the argument versus. We always, as scientists, we like to reduce it down to a single molecule. That's not always the case, and also sometimes more complex mixtures of compounds are safer than if you have a single really effective molecule. There's no balance there. So, that even happens with synthetic drugs.
I was just going to say, one of the things that always fascinates me, and I know where you're going with this, and I was thinking it, pharmaceutical industry discovers this molecule in some sort of plant, like the mayapple. They discovered cisplantin, a top line chemotherapy, because Native Americans knew that when someone had this disease, which ended up being cancer, that eating the mayapple would actually help them get very sick, but then come back very well. And the pharmaceutical industry goes, well, we can't patent the mayapple. Let's find out what's in the mayapple that made it work. Well, what they ended up discovering was the mayapple has kidney protective effects that you don't get when you just take cisplantin. And most people who have cisplantin therapy for cancer end up with destroyed, crushed renal systems. The Native Americans didn't have that because there was a protective component in the mayapple, which leads me to this question. I am a huge, I kneel at the altar of evolution. Everything in my life, I look at why would this be? From an evolutionary perspective, how would this have benefited us? And plants can't fight, they can't bite, and they can't run. So we know that evolutionary pressures on plants are generally specifically designed to help a plant proliferate and its species to grow. And it depends on the other species that prey upon it to carry its seeds and poop them out over here and so on and so forth. So is there, from an evolutionary perspective, anything that you can see why these particular metabolites would be upregulated in these plant forms today, all these millions of years later?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I've thought about this. We obviously think about this a lot, So one example, this is just speculation. So we've obviously focused on the KCNQ channels. They're our favorite bunch of channels. They're so important in the human heart, thyroid, brain, blood vessels, so they're a stomach. They're a great place to start. But we know that for instance, Drosophila, the vinegar fly or fruit fly, has its own version of KCNQ. And it's also involved in their feeding behavior. So one speculation would be that these compounds activate that channel. Now remember, activation of a potassium channel is anti-excitatory, right? So Matt, you activate that channel in Drosophila or whatever fly, and maybe it puts it off eating, changes its feeding behavior. It's not going to feed on the plant. So that's a very simple example, but it's speculation. But many of these potassium channels, there's a version of potassium channel in bacteria, right? That has all the key elements. The pore looks almost identical at the atomic level to what it does in humans, because potassium is potassium, right? So there's a lot of similarities between the potassium channels we have and the ones that are in simple organisms. So I think they could alter feeding behavior. We know some grazing plants have compounds in them that actually cause abortions in grazing animals, for instance. So I haven't looked at this specifically, but KCNQ5 is in uterine smooth muscle. So if you imagine, this is a long-term strategy for a plant, but we're talking about evolution. If you have compounds in that stop grazing animals from proliferating, then you're going to win out over time, right? Your species is going to win out over time. So there are because of the high degree of conservation in some ways between potassium channels and other drug targets or small molecule targets, there's a lot of different reasons why it could be beneficial to plants.
Licorice does that. The real licorice plant, it actually makes it through the into the fetal environment, and it kills the baby if you eat it long enough. And it was used medicinally to spark abortion. self-abortion.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that's my argument about soy, by the way. I know soy is manna from heaven, but if you are a grazing animal feeding on soy and you're consuming all these estrogens, you probably aren't going to have normal litters every year, and
Absolutely.
babies. The male of the species isn't going to have a libido, and guess what? That species is going to get wiped off the planet, and the soy survives.
Yes.
So it's
absolutely. There's a constant biowarfare going on that we don't see because it's on such a long, drawn out timescale.
Yeah. I want to take our first commercial break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the actual noticeable effects from a therapeutic standpoint of how antihypertensive teas are, so that people can understand what to expect from them. Obviously, you shouldn't stop taking your blood pressure medication and just start drinking tea, but the cumulative effects of tea. So we're going to take one quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. Stay tuned. The power of light can be truly life-changing and an important element for every superhuman. Because of this, I want you to experience the power of award-winning Celluma light therapy. Celluma utilizes NASA research technology to improve health at the cellular level and is cleared by the FDA to effectively treat a variety of pain, muscle, and joint conditions, as well as facial wrinkles and acne. Our entire team here at Superhuman Radio uses it. Its innovative shape-taking design allows for easy placement anywhere on the body. Choose from 13 different models. For an exclusive listener discount, go to shrnetwork.biz/Celluma. That's CELLUMA, and use code SHR10 to save 10% off of one of these award-winning devices.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
Antihypertensive. TaylorMade Health is focused on making sure you're able to perform and look your best. They are a leader in game-changing supplements and cosmetic products. Whether you want to increase strength, expedite recovery, facilitate soft tissue repair, or reduce deep wrinkles, TaylorMade Health has you covered. TaylorMade Health is also the home to Dr. Seed's products such as BPC, BPC Plus, and the Chill Pill. All of my listeners can now get 20% off their first order with code TRY20. That's TRY20. This code can even be used on subscription orders. Visit shrnetwork.biz/try20 today and use code TRY20 for 20% off your first order.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where brawn and brains finally meet.
Welcome back to Superhuman Radio. We're talking to Professor Geoffrey Abbott about the antihypertensive effects of green and black tea, and it looks like tea in general to some degree, depending on what plant it comes from, by the way. So how significant of an antihypertensive effect are we talking about here? Do we see? I mean, could this have a drug-like effect if taken in the larger doses?
So tea in general, if you look at most of the population studies or group studies where they'll have control groups, it seems to be lowering in the quantities of tea that people normally drink, which might be, say, 2 to 4 cups a day. We're talking about what seems like a modest decrease of 1 to 3 millimeters of mercury in blood pressure. But the interesting thing is that in people who are hypertensive, who have high blood pressure, tea seems to be effective at taking them away from being hypertensive. So there's a number of things going on. There's antioxidant properties of tea. There's other potential cardiovascular benefits, and then there's the discovery that we recently made that tea compounds directly activate those KCNQ5 channels in the blood vessel smooth muscle. So going back to the changes, 1 to 3 millimeters of mercury sounds pretty small, but as we mentioned earlier, 2 billion people drink tea every day. So if you think about the effects on global health of 2 billion people lowering their blood pressure by 1 to 3 millimeters of mercury. That's a huge population health effect. So it's something where you certainly wouldn't want to dissuade people from taking the current blood pressure medications. They should keep taking them. But people who potentially could use this as part of a therapeutic effect, or people who just want to use it as part of a healthy lifestyle to help stave off hypertension, I think tea can be important. And then there's what we discussed as well about, can we extract the most active molecules and make a more effective medicine, hypotensive medicine from that.
So hypertension is a big problem in the United States and abroad, but it's caused by metabolic derangement and insulin resistance. We know that as insulin rises, angiotensin converting enzyme dynamics change, blood vessel constriction becomes a big issue. That's the intrinsic effect of insulin. But there's an extrinsic effect of insulin that's very, very rarely discussed. And the only reason why I know about it is because as a former powerlifter and user of anabolic steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, I understand how modifying calcium channel can increase strength. Very, very powerful anabolic steroids like trenbolone have been known to affect calcium channel in the heart, which leads to a rapid heartbeat and greater stroke and so on. So insulin has been shown to alter these electrolyte dynamics. And insulin has been shown to foul up the availability of potassium to relax, and magnesium specifically, to relax cells and contractile force. Is there any evidence, because I think tea has been implicated on helping people with metabolic derangement, is there any evidence that the extrinsic effect could be somehow lessening the hypertensive effects of being metabolically deranged by using tea, like as an added value?
So I'm not sure about those that particular area, but as I mentioned earlier, the KCNQ channels, there's 5 isoforms in the human genome, right? KCNQ 1 through 5, and we've been talking about KCNQ 5 today. KCNQ 2, 3 channels are in the brain. Now, there's also the isoform KCNQ 1 is in the heart, but it's also in the pancreas. And so some molecules in tea can also regulate KCNQ1 activity as well, either open or closed, depending on which particular regulatory subunits KCNQ1 is associating with. So there is a possibility, and again, this is speculation, that some of the molecules in tea, including the ones we looked at, could be regulating KCNQ1 activity in the pancreas, and KCNQ1 activity is linked to insulin secretion. So that's a really fascinating potential research that would be looked into. The KCNQ1 function in the pancreas has sort of been a bit difficult to tease out, but we made a knockout mouse that lacks the regulatory subunit that partners with KCNQ1 in the pancreas, and those mice were diabetic. They had type 2 diabetes. So it was important enough to have that effect. And when we put them on a Western diet, they fared really badly. So they weren't able to control their blood sugar. So yeah, it's a really great point. As we mentioned earlier, these plants, they're complicated. There's many different potential targets, and just looking at this one small family, there's about 100 potassium channel genes, 100 different isoforms. If you look across the whole spectrum of different types of potassium channel in the human genome, we just studied a small family of 5, and even those are incredibly influential all over the body. And molecules that might activate KCNQ1 could activate Q5 and Q2, Q3. This is even just one molecule can have very complicated effects. So yeah, I wouldn't rule it out at all, an effect of insulin.
You mentioned Neanderthal and medicinal plants, and you said I can get into that later if you'd like. Can you take us down that path? Because from an evolutionary perspective, I find these things fascinating. Yeah,
this is incredibly interesting to me as well. The history of medicinal plant usage. So, there are cases out there of animals consuming medicinal plants. Obviously, they don't know what they're doing, but it seems like they consume them, and sometimes in the right context. But if we go back to Neanderthal man, 50,000 years ago, we're talking about Neanderthals being fairly prominent on the planet. So there is research published in highly respectable journals, including Nature, which is one of the very top, where the investigators did a study of dental calculus. They can take the stuff that's crammed in between the teeth of a Neanderthal skull, and they can actually extract the DNA from that material and analyze it to see what these humans, were eating, Homo neanderthalensis. So what they found was they studied a range of skulls, and they found that there was one of the skulls had a tooth abscess. This was the only skull out of the group that had willow DNA in the dental calculus.
White willow bark. That's where aspirin comes from.
Exactly. So, these Neanderthals knew that willow bark was a painkiller, and they took it for this tooth abscess. And again, it's not proof, but it's highly compelling evidence.
So one of the things that really changed my entire opinion of knowledge and learning, we call things instincts. Well, people have certain instincts. I did a show a couple months ago where the topic came up about, we were talking about epigenetics, and really epigenetics is so much bigger than we think it is. We look at epigenetics from a disease standpoint today, but there was a study done, and you may be familiar with this, and I may be getting it a little wrong, so feel free to correct me. But they took rats, and they gave them the smell of cherry, and they shocked them until the point that just smelling the cherry prepared them to be shocked. And then they looked at the transgenerational effects of that, and their pups, when they smelled cherry, they became panicked, which means that epigenetically, they were encoded with this knowledge of this experience. And, we wonder, why do baby deer fear humans? They've never seen a human before. Well, epigenetically, it's encoded in them. And now when you start to think of these things, and then you say, well, how did the Neanderthal know that was, well, maybe his mother had a toothache, and she found solace by chewing on. So this changes the entire discussion about knowledge, instinct, intellect, learning. I mean, this is amazing to me that we are born with knowledge that has been passed on epigenetically from our great grandmother. Look at people. I went to Ireland, and I know that both Ireland and Russia have some high levels of alcoholism and depression. They've both went through horrible famine. It's almost like that is encoded in generations upstream. I mean, when you start thinking about this, now all of a sudden it's a game changer. It's too big for me to even get my head around sometimes about all the things that it could be affecting.
Absolutely. It's incredible that, funny you should mention it, because I actually collaborate with a fantastic researcher at UC Irvine called Amal Alachkar, who she's really interested in intergenerational stress transmission. So a lot of it is looking, and we use rodent models, and she really spearheads this work, and we help her looking at exposure to stress in the mother when the mother's pregnant, and what happens to the mouse pups. What are the effects on the mouse pups? And it's incredibly clear that they are born. We looked at nature versus nurture on some of this, and it's incredibly clear that they are biochemically different because their mothers were exposed to stress. Now, whether that's epigenetics or whether they're exposed to different molecules or both, because obviously, as you know, different biochemistry could affect the way the epigenetics and the chromatin remodeling, etc., in those pups. So it's an exact science where you can actually look at the different metabolites, the different gene expression and transcriptomics studies we use to look at the effects of stress on the mother and see it down the line. So even when those pups are adults, you can still see the effects. So the reason that my colleague is interested in it, I think she's from Syria. So we are seeing, a whole generation of children in some countries that have been exposed to incredibly stressful events before they were born, or the parents were as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting area. It's not really related to what we're talking about as much today, but I just happen to be involved in that research as well. And it's incredible. And epigenetics, we have a very strong history of that research at UC Irvine. It's an incredibly important area, and it goes against what we used to think about inheritance. It kind of blows it up in a way, right?
It does, and that makes a lot of scientists angry who've spent decades trying to understand the genetic factors in cancer. And you look at twin studies where two twins, monozygotic twins, they both have the BRCA gene. One gets breast cancer, one doesn't. You go, wait a minute. That can't be because it's genetics. No, it's not. I know it's very fascinating. I don't want to get too far, of course.
Yeah.
So what's the takeaway from your research for somebody out there who suffers from hypertension? Just start drinking tea? Should they look for supplements? What do you think?
I think they go to their physician. Modern medicine gets, there are two camps. There are people who always like to rely on alternative medicine or so-called natural products, as you and I both know. Just because it's natural doesn't mean necessarily it's safer, right? So I think it's important to see a physician and consult with a physician, and don't just disregard that. But look, we all know that if we took healthier lifestyle choices and prevented this to start with by exercise and diet, eating the right types of plants, many of us would never get in the situation to start with. So there's an excellent study been done by a scientist in Scotland, and his name escapes me right now, but he showed that they could take people from pre-diabetes back to normal just with diet, with diet, nothing else. It's all about, much of it is about being overweight. And if you put these people on a 700 a day, 750 calorie a day diet, healthy food where they can feel not starving all the time, you can correct pre-diabetes before it ever gets to diabetes. So
insulin resistance is a real big problem today. There are so many things. I mean, you can eat a healthy diet, but you don't sleep at night because you want to stay up and watch all the TV shows. You're going to be spontaneously insulin resistant.
Yeah, because stress hormones are released and etc. So that's the ideal situation. And at UCI, we now have a growing appreciation of what we call integrative health, where we're trying to encourage and educate about diet and lifestyle as well, as part of a rounded healthcare system, where we don't just let people get sick and then treat them with whatever the latest synthetic drug is, but we try and educate and provide resources so people don't get to that stage. But that's the ideal. But if someone is hypertensive now, they should consult with their physician. They'll probably be getting an effective antihypertensive medication from their physician, but also consider and discuss with the physician. Say, I would like to see what natural products are out there as well. It could be drinking more green tea. It could be looking at some of these other herbs like chamomile. So I think it's great to come to your physician and say, look, I want to do this in a holistic way. I want to improve my lifestyle and my health, not just by taking a drug that patches over, but I want to take this a more holistic approach to this.
Yeah, I want to fix myself. I don't want to mask my symptoms.
Exactly.
I want to fix myself.
Exactly.
We're going to take our last commercial break, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, sure, no problem.
All right, we're going to take our last commercial break. We'll wrap it up on the other side. Stay tuned. Do you remember those delicious toaster pastries you had when you were a kid? The rectangular sugar-filled snacks? Well, guess what? Legendary Foods has just made low-carb toaster pastry. This is the first of its kind, and honestly, these things are amazing. They have 3 to 4 net carb, less than 1 gram of sugar, and 9 grams of protein. You can eat them right out of the wrapper or lightly toast them. The only question is which flavor, strawberry or brown sugar cinnamon. They're available at eatlegendary.com and Amazon. Antihypertensive. As a listener of this show, you know how important your gut is to your overall health. Bioptimizers has a potent product to heal and repair your gut unlike anything else. It's called Leaky Gut Guardian. It's powered by patented IGY Max, an egg-based protein that enhances gut health, reverses antibiotic damage, and strengthens your immune system. Available in 2 delicious powders, vegetarian vanilla and chocolate carnivore. Simply mix it with your favorite beverage. Repair your gut and power up your immune system risk-free and save 10% off. Go to shrnetwork.biz/leaky gut. Don't delay. Fix your gut today. Whether your goal is to build muscle or burn fat, you'll find everything you need at Redcon One. Need help getting a good night's sleep? Try Fade Out, or the most popular pre-workout supplement on the market today, Total War. Sign up for their new Transformation Challenge and win $10,000. Or shop for apparel that people at the gym will know that you are serious about your training. Need a testosterone booster that works? Check out Boomstick. Whatever you need, you'll find the best quality supplements on the market at Redcon One. Go to redcon1.com. That's REDCON, the number 1.com, or go to superhumanradio.net and click the Redcon One banner ad today. Are you ready to change the way you age? Of course you are. That's why you're here. Juvicel is a new first-of-its-kind dietary supplement that includes 10 key research-backed ingredients shown in studies to support lifespan. Things like resveratrol, fisetin, quercetin, pterostilbene, sulforaphane, turmeric, all in a single dose. You may have some of these ingredients already, but Juvicel is the first to combine them all into a single product to support your lifespan. It's vegan, non-GMO, and sustainable. Live better longer with Juvicel. Go to shrnetwork.biz/live better. Use code SHR and save 20% off today.
This is the Superhuman Channel. Evolution just got kicked up a notch.
Welcome back. I have one question, and we can wrap it up. What about people who are taking potassium-sparing drugs or using sodium alternatives that have a lot of potassium in them, or people that actually supplement with potassium? Do they need to be concerned if they are already hypertensive and they're going to start adding green tea into their repertoire?
So a couple of things, normal kidneys and normal bodily homeostasis mechanisms are incredibly good at balancing potassium and sodium because it's just so important, right? Every single cell that fires an action potential requires the delicate balance of sodium and potassium. So we're really good at balancing this stuff. Obviously that gets perturbed sometimes. I wouldn't say that those people should worry too much about 2 to 4 cups of green tea a day. Now, if they were going to go ridiculous and start drinking way too much, just the volume of liquid can throw things off kilter, right? So I think they shouldn't worry about. It's fine to drink a couple of cups of green tea a day. It's a good idea to always ask your physician, but I can't see that would be a problem.
Organic versus conventional. There's more and more organic tea. Elisa drinks exclusively organic tea because just the way everything else is concentrated in the drying and fermentation process, the pesticides and herbicides are concentrated as well. You have an opinion on that at all?
Yeah, I would say, not everyone has the luxury of consuming organic products because they're more expensive generally. But I would say anyone that can should go organic. We drink organic at home, milk, and my kids don't like the taste of non-organic because it tastes different, and I think it's safer to go organic. Absolutely.
And lastly, what about herbal teas? Are they even in this discussion? We're talking about tea that comes from this particular species that's well established to be pretty much what all real tea is made from. But there's lots of people out there who drink herbs that have nothing to do with tea, maybe because they're afraid of the caffeine or whatever. Do they play a role in any of this discussion? Absolutely.
We looked at, I mentioned earlier, we looked at a range of different herbal medicines that have historically been used to treat hypertension. Chamomile tea was one. No caffeine. It definitely activates the same channel. It's a different molecule that does it. We don't understand which one yet. Lavender, people don't drink lavender tea, but lavender was another molecule. plant. Fennel seed was another one. So there's many plants that can do this. We're in the process in our lab of sifting through hundreds and ultimately thousands of plants to figure out which plants are effective at this. Could some of these plants synergize together? The example I gave from the African plant that's used in seizures, could some of these plants synergize together? For instance, we think that rosemary might be able to synergize with cilantro, for instance. That's something we're working on. It sounds kind of not that scientific, but we've got it down to the molecular level, the binding sites of different molecules in these plants. So we're starting to understand it at that level. I wouldn't say just because something is a herbal so-called tea, it would definitely activate that channel. It requires a specific molecule. Tea is just an infusion from a plant, right? So but chamomile tea absolutely does it, and does not have the same compounds. So there's a different one there that does this.
So is there a possibility that drinking a black or green tea along with chamomile, since they're both working through two different pathways, you'd see a greater drop in or a greater antihypertensive effect?
That's a really good question. So we don't know the molecule in chamomile tea yet, but we could do an experiment where we just use the extracts combined. Another one was ginger. So I don't know about you, but anytime we have a sore throat, anytime anyone in our family has a sore throat, we drink ginger tea. It's incredibly effective at just soothing the throat, but also in the study we're seeing channel casing.
I've done a lot of shows on ginger. One of my earliest shows back in 2006, the one herb everyone should be using is ginger. Ginger is an amazing plant for a variety of reasons. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. Can you still hear me okay? I think we're having some trouble. Sounds like your microphone is going dead. I think your headphone went dead. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Hold on. You're muted right now. I don't know. You can't hear me, but you are muted. Oh, that's better. Yeah, you got sorry. Muted. I think your headphone went dead is what it was.
My mic went dead because we were chatting too long before the call.
Okay. Well, we're getting close here to the end. But yes, I was agreeing with you that ginger is amazing. I did one of my earliest shows in 2006 about the magic of ginger. Oncoprotective. I mean, it's just so many great things about ginger. I agree with you 1,000%. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this. I think maybe we'll spark an interest in some people. Maybe you're not hypertensive, keep from getting there, and I got to tell you, caffeine is great, but there's something magical about tea. We talk about synergy. There are other things in there, theanine. There are other things in there that have a nootropic effect that make you feel alert and focused much more effectively than just the 18 milligrams of caffeine that's in tea.
Absolutely. So. But what I will just mention is that people studied decaffeinated tea versus caffeinated. The decaf was not as effective at lowering blood pressure. I don't think it's the caffeine. I think it's the process that removes some of the other helpful compounds. Yeah.
It has to be. Thanks so much for being here, Professor Abbott.
Thank you so much, Carl. I really appreciate it.
Take care. That's it for today. Let's see. Today is Thursday, I think, right? So we have another show tomorrow, Friday, before the end of the week. And I'm sure it's going to be a great one. Please share these shows because there are people out there that can be helped from this information. And you know what? You can help change somebody's life just by sharing a show. So I hope you do that with this show today. And we'll see you tomorrow with more Superhuman Radio. Thank you for being here.